Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the third session of our first day of our three-day Revenue Excellence Summit, Race to 22. These 3 days wouldn't be possible without the work of our amazing sponsors. Thank you to the teams at Atrium, Spiff, Vidyard, SalesLoft, Chorus, Verison Concert, DemoStack, Ring DNA, and Sendoso. We appreciate you and all that you do. For some background, today's event is hosted by the team at Modern Sales Pros. For those of you who are not familiar, Modern Sales Pros is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and the related supporting disciplines. Our mission at MSP is to create an environment for our 20K and growing members to answer questions they'd struggle to solve on their own and to help them see around corners. We do that through great live sessions like what you're about to experience over these next 3 days, through our robust online forum, and in the near future, fingers crossed, our in-person events. Those of you who weren't previously admitted, you should now have access to the community. And if you don't, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can drop us a note via modernsaleshq.com. We have had a full first day. We started our meeting with our panel, You Won't Hit Your Revenue Goals Without the Right Headcount, which was great. And then we had a lively roundtable discussion on 2022 as the year of the Data-Driven Manager. We are ending this fantastic day with our wonderful masterclass on Moneyball for sales. And don't worry, we will continue back up first thing tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with the panel Eat or Be Eaten. Your reps want bigger plates and better territory design. So be sure to check that one out as well. Now for those housekeeping notes before we dive in. First, yes, we promise this event is being recorded. You all heard the notice when you came in, and we will be sharing that with it. You'll be able to access this recording as well as our key takeaways and any resources shared today on our previous events page. And we'll also be reaching out to everyone to let you know when those are available. So don't fret, we won't let you miss them. Second, if you have a question for our panelists, please feel free to use the Q&A function and we'll be sure to get them throughout the event. Now, enough from me. I am thrilled to pass the mic to MSP and Atrium founder, Pete Kazanjy. Pete, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks for keeping all the trains running on time. Hey, everyone, super pumped to be running this event today. You guys are in for a really big treat here to hear from Mike, who is a director of sales over at Ironclad. More on him in a hot second here. They are an amazing data-driven sales organization scaling up in a very meaningful way. So good stuff there. I'm very excited to be talking about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, which is data-driven sales management, but specifically as relates to this notion of what we like to kind of call Moneyball for sales. My background may not look it right now, but I used to be a pretty competitive athlete back in the day. And so, one of the things that I really enjoy is kind of has been watching the transition from, coaching from the gut, managing from the gut, to kind of more data-driven coaching, data-driven management. Even as my San Francisco Giants are beating up on the Dodgers right now in the National League playoffs. And so what we're going to talk about today is a little bit of like how that confluence is happening, where kind of the same sort of transition is happening in sales land. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about that, give a little bit of context for folks, and then we're going to get into some of the kind of like tactical, practical stuff of how this gets done at Ironclad, and then probably have about 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. But the first and foremost thing that we're going to kind of talk about here when kind of setting context is this notion that organizations, whether they're athletic or revenue organizations, can use data and kind of manage themselves using analytics and data in a way that drives better outcomes and improves the performance of those organizations. And so kind of the example that I like to use here is in baseball, where kind of the analytics revolution was largely kicked off and certainly popularized by the Oakland Athletics, who whose kind of analytics, data-driven management kind of journey was chronicled in the book by Michael Lewis, Moneyball, which then of course turned into the movie Moneyball. But for folks who maybe haven't seen the movie, and actually one thing that we did as our sales team was we actually did a team viewing of Moneyball together using Zoom. It was wasn't the like the craziest like user experience in the world, but people kind of liked it, mainly because there was probably a lot of beer involved in a distributed fashion. But the net for people who haven't seen Moneyball or read the book is that the A's, because they had scarcer resources, they didn't have as much money as like the Yankees or the Red Sox or the Dodgers or what have you. They had to be really smart and scrappy about how they deployed that salary expense. And so one of the things that they hit on early on was understanding that they could use data to identify underpriced players. So essentially players that didn't look the part. They didn't look, tall and strapping and, like they were an amazing hitter or X, Y, Z. And instead they just like looked at the numbers, and what they were able to do is they were able to identify essentially underpriced assets in the form of these players, catchers and first basemen and pitchers and what have you, but who had amazing statistics, but just kind of didn't look the part. But they didn't care because they used the data in order to guide their decision making there. And so what they would do is they would pick up these great players kind of on the cheap. And so you can actually see that here in this chart, where this on the y-axis is payroll above league average versus below league average, right? And then over here on the x-axis, you can kind of see wins above league average, right, versus losses. And so you can generally see that there's kind of a correlation in here. We're like, hey, it turns out you spend more money on players, you win more if you're the Yankees or the Red Sox or the Dodgers. But kind of the outlier here is the Oakland A's, who spent way below league average, but somehow we're ended up winning a bunch more than the league average there. And literally what that was the result of their data-driven management, their data-driven hiring. And so it was, and this ended up being a source of advantage until everybody else kind of got on the train and was like, hey, you know what, we should do this too. The cool thing is that it wasn't just it wasn't like a one-trick pony where it's like, okay, we can just use data in order to do better recruiting. It turns out that like once you're data driven, you're always data driven. You have this muscle in the organization that can be used as a recurring source of advantage. And so kind of the more recent version of this is actually how organizations and these teams, the A's being a great example of that, literally use data in the middle of the game in order to make at-bat by at-bat changes. In this case, one of the more popular ways to do this right now is what are known as defensive shifts. So if a batter comes up who has a propensity to hit all their balls to the left side of the field or all their balls to the right side of the field, historically, the defensive players would just sit where they're supposed to sit and not really make a move. Well, what these teams realize, the A's kind of foremost amongst them, is that you could actually shift the players over. You could move your players over to the place where those players have a tendency to hit the ball, whether it's the left side of the field or the right side of the field. And in so doing, the player is there when the ground ball shows up. And so the A's are actually, what you can kind of see here is they ended up shifting probably about like twice as much. You can see like versus righties, 30% of the time versus around 15%, or versus lefties, 73% of the time versus 55% of the time. That's only about 30% more. But and again, this was another source of advantage. And so there's lots of other stories around this. I actually have a longer talk that I like to give on kind of like the analytics revolution in sports. But the thing is, the kind of the net here is like, hey, look, if these organizations that have that spend tens of millions of dollars on payroll and have hundreds of millions of dollars of like sponsorship money at and kind of advertising revenue at risk are doing this. Well, like, what are we doing in sales land? Right? And shouldn't we take a note there as well? And I think there's kind of a similar transition happening where, and back in the day it was like, oh, always be closing and kind of like shooting from the hip. And, a lot of us as sales leaders are kind of tarred with this brush of like, all right, we're used car salesmen or whatever, but like realizing that we're now transitioning from kind of that Mad Men era to the more the Math Men era. And so the net here is that what my claim to everyone at home would be is that, like, look, there's lots of different ways that you can use data to improve your team's performance. There's lots of really important times in in the operating rhythm of a sales organization, in the arc of an organization, where data becomes really, really, really important. Examples of that would be like, hey, you know what? We should be using this in order to understand that how our reps are onboarding and ramping, or not. Because if they're not, we got to get ahead of that. We really should be using data to do a better job of goal setting, not just on outcomes, because like quota is old as time, but also on precursors, right? Leading indicators to quota attainment, leading to indicators to those leading indicators as well. Probably my favorite book on this topic would be Jason Jordan and Michelle Vanzana's Cracking the Sales Management Code. Actually, Michelle is the keynote tomorrow. She's going to be kind of giving her presentation. I'm reading her most recent book called Crushing Quota that's on sales coaching. But their previous book, Cracking the Sales Management Code, is like the Bible of data-driven sales management. And so setting goals on those leading indicators, those intermediaries, et cetera, and all sorts of other kind of manner of things that we should be doing. And so the challenge that a lot of managers run into here is that they're kind of blocked by that. They're blocked on their data-driven sales management journey and kind of adopting this notion of Moneyball for sales. And what my claim to everybody would be is that, like, that's not good, and that we need to solve that. And so there's a couple of ways that managers are blocked. One is that manager enablement is really kind of more of an afterthought, especially as relates to data-driven sales management. And because a lot of enablement resources go to our reps. Right? Which makes sense, right? Because they're the ones closing business, but the sales enablement people are spending their time on, objection handling, or kind of like, sales training or product training or what have you, versus helping managers understand, like, how can I have these data-driven sales management conversations? How can I interpret the metrics and what have you? And so that's something that really we should be getting over. Then the second biggest problem is that, like, if you think about what we ask our managers to use in order to solve this problem, it's really like hardcore analytics tools like reports and dashboards and BI and things like that that we're asking our managers, who are not analysts by background, to use these tools that are kind of for analysts, for analytics people. And so just as a note, I'm going to put a really quick plug in here for Atrium, our software company. What we do is we literally, we make purpose-made software in order to solve that problem, because expecting sales managers to use software or to use like BI and walls of charts and things like that is kind of obnoxious in our opinion. We think that they should have something that is literally focused on helping AE managers, SDR managers, and AM CSM managers have the tools that they need in order to do better data-driven sales management. And really what we just focus on is helping those managers use data to improve their team performance. We work with hundreds of really amazing companies, Ironclad, of course, being one of those, but hundreds of other folks as well. But that's why we're really super passionate about this, and I'm really excited about talking with Mike about that now. So Mike, I know that you've been kind of like sitting there patiently as I've been kind of setting up the context for this Moneyball for sales manager discussion. Can you maybe give a little bit of an introduction about yourself, what Ironclad does, how you came to Ironclad, some of the other sales motions that you've done previously, and just give folks some context on Ironclad sales motion before we get into the nitty gritty here?
Yeah, sounds good, Pete. All the baseball talk got me excited for Game 4 tonight. So that's
nice.
Well, hey, everyone. Mike Flores here. I've been with Ironclad for 3.5 years. I'm the director of sales. And so what is Ironclad? It's a digital contracting solution. And so think of, we replace sales reps having to frantically email legal teams and, ask for the status of red lines. It's a full life cycle solution to just really speed up sales processes. So it's a problem near and dear to my heart that we're excited to solve, and happy to discuss more if anyone's interested. But how did I get to Ironclad? So before Ironclad, I was with SnapDocs, which is also a YC way-back company. Yeah. And so started there, was there for 3 years, leading the sales org. And before that, I was at Zillow, building out the multifamily business over there. So I got out of real estate tech and into something a little bit more horizontal.
Yeah, and so can you maybe give a little bit of a breakdown of what the Ironclad sales organization looks like and kind of like the different segments in the org?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a mid-market segment, a general business segment, and an enterprise segment, and our bands are based on employee size. And so I lead the mid-market segment, which is 500 employees and below. So really, really big swath of companies, all fast growth, going to market for the first time. So really great product fit for Ironclad.
Got it. And then the personas that you guys sell into and kind of like the rough ASPs on those segments that you manage.
Yeah, so let me think of what I can share on the ASP front, but what I can say is, so the persona though, we sell into legal teams as well as increasingly more into sales ops and biz ops teams as well. So really any org or any team that really touches contracts and lead the contract process. A lot of companies pre-legal, so they're we're selling to biz ops, but our bread and butter is really in community around the general counsel and the corporate counsel at these fast growth companies.
Got it. Maybe a better thing instead of ASP would be kind of like deal cycle and like how many stakeholders are involved in a typical sale.
Yeah, so deal cycle for us it's around 60 to 90 days. I mean, it's very typical from a SaaS perspective. ACV as low as 20K, as high as we have $1 million deals. So it's a pretty vast difference. So our average is somewhere, towards the 100K mark for some companies, but it's,
nice.
But yeah, it just really depends on the use case. We try to land and expand as much as we can. But it's a lot of being evangelical and just trying to get your foot in the door for a category that's still kind of up and coming.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, we have a similar situation, which I think we'll get into a little bit more. We're just like, being able to land, prove utility, and then expand across. In our case, that's team by team. And I would imagine in you guys' case, it's probably some other vector of value is way better than like trying to eat the apple, right? Like in one bite, which of course just like elongates deal cycles and what have you. Okay, super rad. I didn't realize that about the biz ops and sales side of thing. As somebody, you're gonna have to flip me to one of your reps, because like as the person who currently kind of contends with our red lines, let me tell you, oh my gosh, it's barbaric. Just emailing Word documents back and forth to each other. It's kind of like, wait, this is how business is done? This is insanity. Anyway, okay, cool. So we're gonna get into a little bit of like data-driven sales management stuff right now. We've had a pleasure of working with Mike and his team for quite some time as Atrium customers, and one of the things that we're really blessed about is like we get to find the really awesome sales nerds and kind of like put them in a bear hug and be like, we're never gonna let you go. We want to like hang out with you and have beers with you and have you on webinars and things like that. So you guys are in for a treat here because Mike's really super thoughtful on this stuff. So Mike, when you think about being a data-driven sales manager, what does it mean to you? Like, what are the metrics you consider? Maybe you can kind of like share a little bit on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think it increasingly in the past, like you had your best IC gets promoted to sales manager, and they just try to be on as many calls as possible and try to close as many deals on behalf of reps. Yeah, be the super rep. And I think that doesn't scale. Like we know that doesn't scale. And so for me, I mean, it was an individual contributor actually when I started at Ironclad. I took a step back from sales leadership and stepped into the room because we only had 2 people on the sales team, right? And so for me, it was about building some credibility and doing the motion myself. But also, I took an approach that I think was very, analytics driven, and did a lot of work around, hey, how many, my lead funnel, how many opportunities I need. And I think that made me a more valuable manager, right? Because I was able to like pass that data on when it came on that was new, and I stepped into management again. And so, I think it's about also creating the right culture around data from the first step. And I think for a lot of our new AEs, or just new AEs that ever get hired into a new organization, what's the first thing they ask? Hey, who's top of the leaderboard, and what are they doing, and how can I do that? And in the past, especially in the in-office world, it's, hey, I'm just going to go sit by that person or take him out to coffee and get the tools of the trade.
Right.
In this new world, it's a lot harder. And so one of the things we make a pretty big focus around is day one is to do an onboarding session around what are the stats that matter here, and how are the top performers, what did they do in month 2 of ramp, how many opportunities should you be working backwards from within your first month. And it's a lot clearer for somebody, and a lot more attainable when they see that data.
Yeah, ramp is like the hardest time, because at least we're all blessed that we have at least like these shorter sales cycles, like 60 or 90 days, but it's still like not nothing, right? Because you get to that point where, because like the rule of thumb is 2 sales cycles before you really start seeing kind of things taking care of business, right? It's starting to like gel. And so that if that's like 120 days or 180 days, and say you're like a month of training where someone's like literally just getting situated and getting their like laptop dialed in and kind of like, doing product training, what have you. So that's a month. And then you add 120 days on top of that, that's like 150 days. That's 5 months right there, or 6 months. And so if you're only looking at lagging indicators like bookings, or even like historically, the way that people do, like, oh, okay, I want to see the first win, right? And the problem with that, of course, is that like the first win could be like total fluky bullshit, right? And so if you're just like, hey, that person's good, right? Like you're declare victory and go home, that can be a really big problem. And this is why when I originally, I forget who turned me on to cracking the sales management code, but when I read it and kind of saw Jason Jordan's framework around like lagging indicators, like kind of intermediaries, and then like leading indicators, it really was like, oh man. And so ramp is a super super important example of that, because you literally don't have the lagging indicators, right? So I mean, it's kudos to you that you take the team through. Like, I guess it's one thing as a manager to be bird dogging that. It's another thing to help the reps understand, be like, cool, this is what I'm gonna bird dog. So I would recommend that you bird dog it too, because it's going to make you successful. Also, I'm going to hold you accountable to it. That's like, I'm going to steal the that kind of explanation piece to that and add it to my onboarding protocol.
Yeah. And the accountability part is historically it's like, let's shame people into making the most calls, or like, and I think it's, if you hire the right people that are self-motivated and are smart and thoughtful, if you just give them the data and say, hey, we all want the same thing, right? We all want you to be number 1 on the leaderboard. Here's the data to do it. And what you choose to do with it is on you. But, I think it's a shift. It makes them a partner. They feel a little more educated in the beginning instead of being directive towards them. But your example about lagging indicators, and the worst case scenario is that somebody's off to the races and 3 months into their ramp, the signs emerge and you've wasted three months. I'll give a great example. On our team, we had a sales class start 6 weeks ago, and one person who I was really excited about joining, I already saw some signs of like, okay, it's a little slower, the opportunities are not, hasn't knocked out his first opportunity yet, like this person certainly isn't lazy, what's going on? And we were able to dive in to a lot of the stats around open rates, and what ended up happening was that he was trying to be so precise on the emails he sent, and like literally spending an hour writing the perfect email that was former attorney, so we have a lot of former attorneys that join, so it's like memo, right? And we made a quick adjustment, and is so much better than like that us not knowing that until 3 months in. Like I don't think we would have been able to come back from that, right?
Yeah, for sure. The way that we handle that is one thing that we really kind of keep a close eye on is stage advancements, right? So when I think about the metrics that I like to pay attention to, it's obviously like those leading indicators, intermediaries, and lagging indicators, right? And the way that I kind of do that is there's like quantity metrics and quality metrics. Quantity metrics and quantity metrics can be like different things too. They can be like, hey, are we busy? Like, are we touching our ops? Like, you can just use like email as like a proxy for that. And oftentimes reps will be like, oh, emails don't close a deal. It's like, no, but it shows that you're like on top of your stuff. Like, come on, right? Like, you're busy, things are happening. Same is true with like customer facing meeting volume as well, right? Like, if you're not having meetings, at least in the way that we work, like if you're not having meetings with your customers, you're not like, the software doesn't sell itself, despite what people would love to like tell themselves a story about it. So if you're not having customer facing meetings, like, guess what? You're not moving the ball forward. All that's great, but then one of the intermediaries that we look at is essentially stage advancements, like how many ops are getting to a specific stage. Like in our case, because one of the cool things with Atrium is it takes like 90 seconds to turn on an Atrium account. Like, you just OAuth it to your Salesforce account. It's a very, very key part of our sales motion that our AEs we call it light up data, light it up, right? And so there's literally a stage. There's like, meeting pending on our stages. There's like meeting pending. There's disco. There's if there's a security review, we have that, and then there's this stage in the middle where it's like data has been lit up, and then like there's like a day or so of kind of like tuning it up. And so one of the things that I'm really happy about, Atrium actually has a specific KPI card called stage advancements, which allows you to report on how many opportunities made it to a given stage in a given time period. And so like we really bird dog that to make sure like the AEs are they getting new opportunity inflow? That's obviously really important, but then also, are they getting the data live? Because if they're not getting the data live, if they're getting opportunity inflow and the SDRs are like putting stuff on their calendars, but they're not getting the data live, like that's a problem, right? And so that's actually something that, and because we have like a 50% win rate from the point at which data gets lit up. So it turns out like it's pretty important to light up the data. And so that's like an example of something that we bird dog really hard, and the reps know that. So I guess maybe I'm doing a little bit of like the Mike Flores approach to onboarding, where like they know like, hey, look, I'm here on this disco call to light up data, and then we visualize it and we actually goal on it as well. And then of course there's like the lags as well, like, okay, how many proposals went out, and then like how many contracts are out, hey, contracts, etc. Like those are some of the things that we try to pay attention to. I think you had something that around opportunity kind of conversion rates that you pay attention to as well. Am I remembering that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So we flowchart like, hey, what an ideal deal process looks like, right? What are the steps? And certainly that aligns with our stages and opportunities. And so we have pretty good data on stage conversion. And the one I look at a lot is win rate from stage. So if it gets to a certain stage, what's going to be the win rate once it gets to that stage? And if you're doing your stages right, that should be, pretty even line, right? And not too crazy, and certainly shouldn't go down at any stage, right? But it should be pretty linear. And for me, what I notice is that it's like, okay, kind of good, really good. Once it gets past, similar to your, go live or light up the data stage. For us, it's once we have a custom demo. So they've given us, in our case, their contract. So they've given us their sales order form, or they've given us their NDA, and we've mocked that into a very specific workful for them, which AEs do. We have a self-service way of just taking a contract and create a workflow from it. But that like threshold for us has proven to be key. And so what we look at is, okay, and it's material, like that difference between that stage and the other stage. And so what we do is, okay, how many calls do we have this week for all the opportunities in this stage? And what I do, I'd look back on those opportunities or look back at those calls. Shout out to Gong, we use Gong or over here. And so it's us too. There you go. So we'd look back, I'd listen to those calls where they didn't convert. And sure. And it was a great enablement opportunity. I mean, sometimes it was us not preparing enough going into the call. It was us, maybe not picking up on some cues for somebody who wasn't convinced they were going to be able to get broader stakeholder buy-in on it. I mean, no one wants to take on a project that they know is going to fail. And so you can do a lot to get ahead of that. But without that data, we would have maybe been looking at like, negotiation and other things like that, where usually you go to where when you're not winning as much as you want to be winning.
Yeah, I feel that historically the way, and we'll kind of get into this on our third topic around like data-driven coaching, what ends up happening is like if you're not able to like pinpoint the spot where like, you know, an SDR is struggling, like and break it down. Actually, these graphics that we've got right here kind of are the metrics, like the metrics inspection tree, where you can like isolate in the decision tree where the problem is. If instead you're kind of just like, oh, I'm going to listen to calls and like maybe I'm on the right call where the problem happens, or maybe like I just get CC'd on stuff or whatever, but it just ends up being just kind of like this like information overload versus saying like, hey, look, you know what? We're going to look at the win rate from stage for every one of my reps. And like, it's funny, we do the same thing where you can just pinpoint in and you're like, cool, everybody else, like, actually we had an issue with this recently, man, everybody else has like a 95% win rate from contract out, except, whoa, what's going on here? Like this guy, it's like a 50-50 shot. It's kind of like, are we just like having some bad beats there? Or are you just like throwing like darts? Be like, DocuSign for you, DocuSign for you. It's like Oprah, right? Like here, you get one, you get one. And like kind of, and that way what you can see is you can say, okay, this rep seems like he or she has a problem here. This rep seems like he or she has a problem here. And then what we can do is we can dive in there and be like, hey, I'm observing XYZ, right? Like what gives here? Oh yeah, you know, this is a new, or like see when it showed up from a time standpoint, see like when you know, when the conversion rate started kind of declining. Yeah, that's so fascinating because like we literally do that as part of our QBR process, is like go back and look through that stuff. I know we're going to talk about QBRs in a second here, but let's kind of talk a little bit about setting goals, because I think it's one thing to kind of like, oftentimes what ends up happening is we see organizations who are like, yeah, we're going to start paying attention to metrics or whatever, and then they kind of select the metrics that they want to pay attention to, and then they're like, cool, we're data driven, versus saying, okay, well actually this is how much of this behavior we would expect to see, or this is what this quality ratio ought to be. And I guess kind of use the baseball analogy here. What is it? It's the Mendoza line. Is the Mendoza line 250 or 225 for the batting average? We're like below it. If you're batting below the Mendoza line, it's like not so great. So how do you think about you know, setting goals and kind of managing with goals?
Yeah, it's important. And it's probably the hardest thing for a sales manager to do, or sales leadership to do, because, you know, you got to find the sweet spot of choosing a goal that's hard enough that it motivates, but not so hard that it demotivates and you can't hit it. Right. It's obvious.
Totally.
But the for us, you know, you have to look at historicals and you have to be able to think through, all right,
Yep.
what was, and you try not to find the obvious ones. It's not, you know, who make the most calls, who can, even
Sure.
to the point of who can close the most business. Like bookings, even, it's not a goal, in my opinion. It's more of a byproduct of you doing the right things to get to that outcome, right? And so for us,
Yep.
and you mentioned the QBRs, and you know, we try to find maybe a non-obvious thing that is really simple to understand, and in terms of the metric. And we keep going through the Moneyball thing. I like, you know, the Freakonomics approach, where it's like, hey, isn't it interesting that this person who's the top three, you would think that they're leading the metric on this, but they're not. They're actually leading a metric on here that maybe wouldn't be so obvious. So let's talk about it and give them the spotlight to talk through why they do well. And so keeping it simple is something that is absolutely key, because it's something that they can put on a Post-it note. I'll give you an example of two that we have that are just like goals that I just try to drill into everyone's head. It's one is we've done all the math and we've looked at years and years of data. And if you create 2 opportunities, whether that comes from your BDR, whether it comes from inbound, if you just leave every single week with 2 opportunities that are generated that meet the criteria, right? Not just, you know, shell opportunities. I can't see a scenario where you don't hit 80% of quota, like flat out. And so that harp on that. That's the first chart we show on our Monday stand-up. It's 2 opportunities. And so the other one, and this was using some of the data piped in from Gong into our Atrium dashboards. One was around asking questions. And for the first 6 months of AEs ramping, you know, they're always on the bottom of the stack ranking around just question rate. And probably obvious as well, but something that is a really good enablement point where like, yeah, you're asking all the situational questions. You understand their contracts landscape. Oh, they do NDAs. Oh, they do order forms. Like, cool.
Yep.
They don't ask the follow-up question of like, hey, talk me through the process of somebody doing this. What is the pain points you're seeing?
Yep.
And they don't get to second or third level pain. And which is hard to do when you're first joined. You don't know the right questions to ask.
Yeah,
and
you don't feel and you're like not confident, and you're kind of like, okay, I'm just gonna do my little checklist here.
Yeah. It's like, sweet, they do contracts, I'm gonna go with it, right? Or you start hearing,
oh, they're gonna buy, they do contracts.
Yeah, you're just excited to create an opportunity, right? And I mean, everyone knows, like deals are won or lost in that first conversation a lot of times, because that's what you're using to base your discovery or your demo one off of. You're pulling some data that you got in your discovery call in the last, some of the last questions, and if they're questioning value, right? So it is, those were the two data points that we just drill into everyone's head and let them know that there is light at the end of the tunnel. You will get to the point you're asking this many questions, but you have to work at it.
Yeah, I think it's funny. Yeah, we kind of do something similar where when we think about like goals, and I do a bigger kind of like master class on setting and managing with goals. It has a provocative name, setting and managing with goals that don't suck. But what we try to do is we try to have, like, depending on the sales motion, I'll use AEs as an example because it's related to like the operating rhythm. We have like a handful of goals that are weekly goals, and those are going to be like a little bit more kind of like cadence. It's like, hey, are you keeping your trot up, right? And that's like customer facing meetings. How many opportunities are you touching as well? It's not kind of like, okay, that's going to like, change dramatically week on week, but it's going to potentially show like, oh man, if somebody's like low activity one week, why is that? Is it because like their time got like super sucked up with something else or whatever? So we try to do that a couple on a weekly basis. On the monthly basis, we do a little bit more like heavier stuff. We look at like new opportunity inflow. We want to see our AEs having like 20 ops that are flowing into their pipe. So we set a goal on that, and Atrium monitors it. But then actually the kind of like those key and that's like a leading indicator, right? Like inflow. But then there's the lagging or like the intermediary indicator, which is hitting a variety of stages on those ops. So kind of to go back to the point about data lights, we want to see between like 5 to 10 data lights that are happening, right? And in a given month, and then of course, like we do bookings and wins on a quarterly basis, and we actually have a couple of efficiency metrics. So win rate and ASP we measure on a quarterly basis, but this Atrium just kind of like monitors that for us in order to say, because doing like a 30-day time period average on like win rate is kind of silly if you're only closing like 4, 5, or 6 deals a month, because like one month you could have 2, another month you could have 7. It doesn't really matter because it like kind of comes out in the wash. But we do those on a quarterly basis. But then the big thing that we kind of realize, and I think there's like an iterative process, where like if you identify that there's a new metric that really matters, like in our case, it was actually 2 QBRs ago, what we recognized was just that like one of our top performing reps was just, he was lighting up data just like so much, like with a much higher clip than a bunch of the other reps. And he's actually one of our more assumptive and kind of like, aggressive reps, which is great when you're kind of like selling an evangelical solution. You kind of have to do that, kind of like bust through kind of like the status quo. But what you could see what was funny was this win rate from like Data Live was totally the same as everybody else's. So it had nothing to do with the fact, like he wasn't selling like better later on. And in fact, actually some of his like win rates from other stages from like proposal was like a little bit light, because what he was doing was he was like giving himself lots of at bats, but like his bookings were just outpacing a lot of other folks, his wins and his bookings. Importantly, I knew it wasn't just like he had a couple of high ASP deals or whatever. It was like literally the number of wins was higher because the win rate was there. The ASP was in line with everybody else. And so it was like this aha moment, which in retrospect wasn't like super rocket science, but it's like, look, we got to have our reps give themselves more at bats, there. And so what we kind of modified our sales behavior mantra a little bit to be like, yo, we're here to show people how to do data-driven sales management. The best way to do that is on their data. We can really kind of like seeing is believing. If we get them to light up their data, they're going to be super stoked. It's going to give you a better chance of success. So then we gold on it. So we had that realization from that QBR. So like, oh, okay, this makes sense. We then gold on it to say, hey, look, we want to see this many data lights in a month, but also this conversion rate. So we want to like see that 70% of ops, like new op inflow, turns into these data lit ops, and then we're going to measure on that. So that became like essentially it's a mini win rate, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like a precursor from win rate. Like we want to see that you have a win rate of 25%. By the way, we know you're going to have a win rate of 25% if you light up 70% of your ops to data and then 50% of those close, right? It just like ends up being like a linkage, right? And so now that's like a goal metric that we really kind of keep focused on there. But it was like a good like loop, right? Where we identified the new metric and then like we were like on top of it. Anything else on kind of goal setting stuff there and kind of managing with goals?
Yeah, no. Well, one thing you said that reminded me of another like maybe non-obvious metric that I thought has been really interesting this past year. It's around so weekly versus quarterly. Yeah, there's some that are just better to look at over 90 days or trailing.
Oh, totally.
Quarter. And one for us that I think is really interesting is the bookings per meeting metric. And especially when, in this day and age where like Zoom fatigue is real. And so one of the interesting things I saw was like, if I want to be building a sales process or just make things repeatable, if I want to be building that around a person or a cohort of AEs that are doing it right, like that's the metric I want to go to because they're able to do more with a less, like, they're able to close a lot more business and a lot fewer meetings. Which should be the dream. Like I have no, like you can tell me about your calendar being just back to back to back to back all day, and that's cool. What's the conversion? How effective are these meetings? We're sometimes like some of your best reps still just take meetings because in absent of like a next step. I can think of one AE on my team who has by far the highest bookings per meeting, and she's just so efficient with her meetings. And so good about like being really prescriptive about the upfront contract, knowing exactly what she's trying to get out of it. Closes a lot more business, and has a lot better like work-life balance than some other folks. And like that's a dream. Like that's the person I want to be building my org around.
Yeah, for sure. One of my reps, Carson, actually had this really good point where he's like, look, oftentimes we get caught up. The thing you have to be kind of careful about is like you can kind of get caught up in the leading indicator, like the behavioral leading indicators, and say like, hey, look, like we should just be having more meetings. It's like, well, no, it's a high quantity of high quality selling activity, right? And so the reason why we have meetings is to close business. If you can hear someone's like, oh, well, like, I think we should show this to XYZ. And then the rep is able to kind of take a step back and say, okay, interesting. Question for you. Is that something that, is really required in order to proceed here? Is that kind of like more of a nice to have situation? Oh yeah, I mean, Mike, I guess now that you bring it up, it's kind of more of a nice to have. Okay, well, here's what I would propose there. Do you think it would be a crazy idea if maybe we start working with legal in order to get our paper process started, and then maybe we can put that on the other side of that? What do you think about that? Actually, yeah, you know what, Mike, that is a really good idea. And like poof, you just destroyed a meeting and like drove the and they moved the ball forward there versus like, oh, another meeting. Hey, yeah, we should do that. Right. And then what ends up happening is you start seeing these reflections of bad sales behaviors in the metrics. Like I had another rep who, it's funny that you bring up the bookings per meeting. He's great. And like the big thing that we've been working on with him is to get him like more aggressive to say sentences like the sentence I just said earlier. The previous thing we were working on with him was he was one of the beneficiaries of identifying, hey, we got to light up data. as much as possible, because he's like a really nice guy and kind of comes from a more of a relationship selling background. He's super bright as well. And so we fixed that, and now he is actually like, he's king data light on the team, which is fantastic. But what we recognized was that his bookings per meeting was a lot lower, not a lot, but like 25% lower. And then when you looked at that, but like he was outperforming from a booking standpoint. So it just meant that he was like having a bajillion meetings. And then moreover, you could see that they were all like, his number of first meetings was very similar to everybody else. But what was happening was he was like taking those incremental meetings, like, hey, we should show this to so-and-so. Okay, right? Versus like, oh, should we? Right? And so we identified that and then kind of saw where there was some area for improvement there. And now that's like snapped into space there. And it's hard, right? Because like you have to identify those problems and then like remediate the behavior. But like the benefit that comes out of it is like you're like micro coaching or like coaching on a per rep basis, rather than just being like, everyone work harder or like everyone close more business, right? And it's really rewarding when that happens, which actually is our next topic. So when you think about like doing your data-driven coaching and development stuff, can you maybe share with people like how you do that, what your operating rhythm is there, et cetera?
Yeah. So from a week to week basis, I have 3 first lines below me, and then another, so across like 20, 24, 25 AEs. And so the one-on-ones.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah, nice ratios for right now. I'm hiring managers in case anyone's interested. But
Mike would be an amazing sales leader to work for. Everybody should go work. Everybody should go work for Mike. Fantastic.
Thank you, Pete. But no, so it's so on a week to week basis. I mean, just about every one-on-one is the background is the dashboard, and what is, hey, where are we trending up, where are we trending down. We also have some really interesting emails and Slack updates that go around. Me, I do just about one-on-one a month per AE, and my theme.
You just skip levels.
Yeah, and so what I will do is for one of them, it's all about the data, and it's, hey, interesting trends. Look at what some of these others are doing in comparison, or hey, cool thing I picked up in another one-on-one is this. And it's, it just can't be punitive. Like, that's the biggest thing. It can't be like like they know where they stand on certain things. It's never like a up at the bottom of the activity again, like the
wall of shame. Yeah.
I mean, and like, look, that might come up soft, but like in the end of the day, like everyone has access to the same chart, and they know that they're not getting away with it. And what I say is like, hey, look, if production slips and we have to have like a trick conversation, I've been lucky to not have to have a lot of those. But if that does come up, then it's like, what's the first thing we're going to look at? Where are you putting in the inputs? Where are you putting the effort? Like, I'll work with someone who is working hard and is driven and just not, it's not clicking. But like, look, if you're, like, what am I missing on this chart?
You're mailing it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and lucky you hire the right profile that doesn't come up, but sometimes it does, and you have that to look back on. But to the other piece of this, like data drive, how's it driving rep coaching and development? On our QBRs, we do a stand and deliver for everybody on the team to give a 5 minutes on, hey, this was a metric. I have a whole board of metrics I call metrics that matter. It's an eyesore of like how many are there, but it gives them a lot to choose from. And when I say it's a stand and deliver of like the metric that you were most proud of, and the metric that it's going to be a point of focus this quarter.
Ooh, I like that. And it's like co-created.
And it's not me telling them like, hey, look, you need to do better on converting, but
I'm stoked on this.
Yeah. And it'll be interesting to see what they come up with, because you never know like what clicks in there, or like what they're surprised about. So it drives, I mean, and then you just have that in the background at all times. They have access to it and they can see it. And the ones who are driven will act on it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think on the thing about like the leaderboards and the walls of shame and kind of stuff like that, I think what you can do there is like, so much of this is like awareness and making sure that you have like a data infused culture. And that's actually like one of the things I have a pretty dim view of is like back in the day, there'd be like, the dashboards on the TVs on the sales floor or whatever. And like, no one would ever look at them, but they were kind of cool insofar as it was like, look, hey, like we take this seriously. Now, of course, the problem is a lot of those organizations would have those and like they wouldn't be refreshed or whatever, and they wouldn't actually like have like views like dashboards or like, tables or whatever that they looked in one-on-one. So it's like, oh, okay, that's like literally window dressing or like, I guess, wall dressing. But like the notion of like having things, and now the current version of that is email broadcasts or like Slack broadcasts or whatever. And even if they don't get looked at all the time, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, no, 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 no. Like this is a thing. This is a thing, right? And so the way that yeah, so I can kind of speak to the way that we kind of like what my operating rhythm looks like there. Um, so first, one of the sayings that we have on our sales team is calendar is destiny, right? Both with respect to reps, like if you have customer facing meetings on your calendar, that's good. And then moreover, if you have like a next meeting on the calendar, that's good. But it also is true with managers as well, right? So we have pipeline reviews, for our team. But then we also have deal strategy meetings. So we have a pipeline review, it's like communal. And then I have deal strategy meetings, 30 minutes per rep once a week. And that's not for like, scrub and close dates and amounts and forecast categories and stuff like that. It's more like, hey, these are the 3 ops that are a pain in my ass, or these are the 4 ops that are a pain in my ass. And the reason why we do that is because the one-on-one, which is a half hour and happens for us every 2 weeks, we don't talk about deals in there at all. We talk about performance, right? We talk about coaching, right? And that's what that space is for, because we took the deal stuff and we put it over here. We know that we have the space for the coaching stuff. And so the way that we this is actually one of the things that another book I'm super pumped on is a book called 5 Secrets of the Sales Coach. It's by Corey Bray and Hillman Sori. It's absolutely fantastic. It's written as like a narrative, right? Like a parable, but it's all about sales coaching. And one of the things that you have to do is like, you got to make space for it. You got to have the thing that you're working on, right? So again, as kind of like a former athlete, you can't like tell a golfer or a batter, like, okay, like you keep your elbow up and like keep your head down, and like do this and like step like this and whatever. It's just like you have to focus on 1 or 2 things, right? Because otherwise it's going to be a total disaster. And so the way that we do that is we have these coaching plans that are in place that are tied to metrics. And like, to use the rep example previously, when we identified the fact that he was being a little soft on his data light behavior, we're like, hey, look, what we're going to do is on our coaching dashboard, I have these coaching dashboards for all of our reps. Like each one has like I have 8 reps. So each one has their own, the tiles are different, right? So in this guy's case, the top tiles were data lights per week, and then conversion rate from new opportunity to lit up data there. And like, it was a dashboard with 2 tiles. That's it. Right. And which is important, because sometimes people get these like crazy like views and it's like, oh, what am I doing? And he's like, no, this is for this. And in our case, it was really easy to throw together because we have good software to do it. But we just bird dog that. And like over time, we saw that behavior. And so not only do we have that metric in place, but we were talking about, we said, okay, these are the talk tracks that you're going to say. So like here are these 10 words. Hey, I would recommend that we set up a free account for you. Hey, can you share your screen? Because I would love to show you how that rep is ramping. Well, let's set up an account for you. Like 10 talk tracks. And then he went and practiced the hell out of them. Like he went in the batting cage, if you will, right? And practiced the hell out of them. And then we just kept bird dogging that metric while, and then the other thing that I did with him is I said, I need you, every time you have a first meeting, I want you to send me the gong clip of your close for that. Right. Mm-hmm. So there's an accountability component to it. So it was like we had the metrics in place. We had the practice that I had put in place for him, right? Like do these behaviors. And then we had an accountability component to it, such that as he was going into these calls, he's like, oh man, I'm gonna have to send that goofball Pete my recording. All right, I better like muscle up and get ready to do the right sales behavior here. And so like what ends up happening is like we do that on a rep by rep basis. So he has that problem and another rep has a different problem and so on and so forth. And so that's what we do. Like that's how what's core to our operating rhythm is those coaching one-on-ones that happen for a half hour every 2 weeks that are tied to those coaching dashboards. And of course we set goals as well. We call them initiatives. So it's like, here's a dashboard plus a set of goals. And that's the like, let's get your data live better. And then this rep over here, we're like, you're a pig pen, you have pipe hygiene problems, your coaching dashboard has untouched opportunities and stuck ops, right? Yeah. So those are kind of the ways that we approach that. But yeah, I can't recommend highly enough that 5 Secrets to the Sales Coach. It's absolutely fantastic. Cool. So I think we're kind of at time here. Mike, any kind of like parting shots before we move into Q&A here on how to be an amazing data-driven sales manager like the illustrious Mike Flores?
Wow, that way too much credit there, but yeah, no. So, and I'm like taking a peek at the Q&A, and one thing that like I do want to hammer home, like there's an art and there's a science to the role, right? And I think and Asher has a question around, is there a time where you spend too much time looking at the data? And absolutely. And I think you do, it's an input, it guides a lot of things. Give you an example. I used to do a lot of my forecasting based on like percentages of deals that I think that were, and like kind of a blended forecast. And it got to the point where it's like, no, like we need some qualitative insight into these deals. And you got to at some point make a call on these deals for things that are just will never appear in the data. The tone of your POC and the energy and things like that. And like you can't operationalize everything, and you don't want to hire people that are just going to try to hide behind emails and be afraid to pick up the phone to get a better answer. And which I think is kind of the profile of somebody who's probably a little more data driven, is be a little more interesting, maybe perhaps. And so it is really important for the people to strike a balance, but it has to be a balance. And I think anybody that is too far on either side of the spectrum of just being the free wielding, artist, or the person who's just like numbers, I'm going to do, X, it's never going to be successful. So I think it's a great question, but you have to have both.
I think that's true. But like, if you think about where sales managers and sales leaders come from, like if there's going to be like a problematic pathology, it's going to be more like freewheeling, shooting from the hip versus like I'm spending there are more kind of like sales operations people that are going into sales leadership and what have you. But in general, I think that like our problem as an industry is not that we are too data driven. Right. And oftentimes when people are like, oh, we were like, we can't spend too much time looking at this data. It's like, cool. How much time are you spending?
Yeah.
Well, none. But it's just like, okay, got it. So I think essentially what I'm hearing from you is, as a manager, you're using the same objection handle that a rep who doesn't want to prospect is using, because you just don't like the taste of that medicine. Got it. How about if we enable you and make it easier for you, as opposed to just like shirking the duty? Anyway, I have opinions on this. Cool, Mike. Well, I think we're out of time here. This was super duper rad. Folks, if you want to say hi to Mike, obviously link to him on LinkedIn. He's a really fantastic resource and a great guy. I'm okay too. You can find me online on LinkedIn or on Twitter. And yeah, I would totally recommend any of those books. Cracking the Sales Management Code is fantastic. Five Secrets to the Sales Coach. Obviously, I'm a little bit of like a sales bookworm here, but those are all really fantastic kind of like next resources for folks to check out. So, Elizabeth, did you have anything that we needed to cover before we wrap?
Nope, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Pete and Mike. It's been fantastic to have your insight on this subject. For everyone who attended, the recording and key takeaways will be made available shortly, so be on the lookout for our daily recaps of the summit with these links and more. And check out the rest of our summit offerings, which I am putting in the chat right now. Thank you again to Atrium and to all of our summit sponsors, and thank you to everyone out there for attending. We can't wait to see you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. for our panel Eat or Be Eaten. Your reps want bigger plates and better territory design. Stay safe and have a lovely rest of your day. See you all tomorrow.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye guys.